On today's episode of China Explained, China downplays the COVID situation and struggles to procure medicine for its frustrated, suffering population. Dozens of young people were detained over the protests that took place in November, proving once and for all that fundamental freedoms will not be afforded to ordinary people if it costs the CCP to lose face. Elections are being held in Taiwan, and there are international repercussions. Before we get any further into the video, please like the video if you enjoyed it. This small gesture helps us with the YouTube algorithm. And without any further ado, let's dive into the mismanagement of the pandemic by the CCP. There have been widespread doubts about China's official account of the COVID outbreak, as the CCP claims that everything is under control and that lifting the lockdowns has been a success. But witnesses claim a lack of hospital beds and funeral homes have been full since the protests last month. We will come back to what happened to the protesters, but for now, know that some health experts claim that by the end of this year, more than 1 million people will die of the virus of unknown origin, with British-based health data firm Airfinity going as far as to claim that there could be close to 36,000 fatalities every day next week. Even after knowing the actual data, Vice Premier Sun Chunlong said the virus was at a relatively low level. Supporting the statement, health officials said the number of COVID patients in hospitals and with critical conditions was on the decline. Recently, the overall pandemic in the country is at a relatively low level. Sun said in the comments reported by the state-run Xinhua news agency, adding, "The number of critical patients at hospitals is decreasing steadily. Though the rescue mission is still heavy, all of this is taking place during the Chinese New Year, or the Lunar New Year, which is a time for people to travel on trains, buses, and flights with gifts in hand to meet their families, whom they haven't met for the past 3 years. For some, it is a time for joy and celebration, while for others, the holiday reminds them of lost loved ones." China's internet regulator said this week it wouldn't censor any fake information about the spread of the virus that could cause gloomy sentiment during Lunar New Year festivities. So you already know that there will be even heavier censorship on the internet, and people will be barred from sharing all instances of the mismanagement of the pandemic by the CCP. Although, in a rare moment of clarity, President-Director Xi said that he was worried that the large influx of travelers to rural areas may result in an overburdened healthcare system, and that protecting the elderly, many of whom are not fully vaccinated, was a top priority. In recent weeks, many have turned to the black market, where hawkers claim to sell COVID treatments ranging from illegal imports of Indian-made generics of Pfizer's Paxlovid to the bona fide product, up to nearly 8 times the market price. This shows how inept the CCP is in keeping the COVID situation under control and how catastrophically the healthcare systems are failing that they can't even provide their population with necessary medication. Frustrations have also been rising over the government's announcement that the CCP has failed to reach an agreement with Pfizer to include Paxlovid under its national insurance plan, with officials saying the price asked was too high. This means that the CCP is willing to give financial aid to countries like Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and Afghanistan to further their political ambitions and agendas, but cannot provide their masses with life-saving medication. Xi should get his priorities in order and focus on saving lives like most other Western countries that he and his diplomats so happily criticize. But instead of focusing on actual medication that works based on real science, the CCP has started to peddle traditional Chinese medicine, Qingfei Padui, and the homegrown antiviral pill, Asvodine. While Qingfei Padu is complete garbage and has no scientific evidence providing proof of its effectiveness, Asvodine also has limited data on how well it protects against severe disease. According to state media, the Pfizer pill is available in certain community hospitals in major cities like Beijing, Shanghai, Tianjin, and Guangzhou. It is also sold on several e-commerce platforms, where there is some suggestion in local reports that supply constraints are easing. But the situation brings to light a question about how broadly the pills will be distributed across China, and if there are sufficient medical resources to prescribe them, because China still has a lot of rural areas that are incapable of dealing with such a massive outbreak, let alone have the infrastructure to procure medicine that has to be important at a very high cost, which most residents can't afford. Before we dabble a little into the Taiwanese elections and their international repercussions, let's talk about the aftermath of the protests on November 27th. We all know that the CCP was forced to lift the lockdowns, hailed as a victory for the protesters, and most mainstream media declared it a success. But that is only half the story, as dozens of young Chinese, many of them women, are being quietly detained for taking part in November's white paper protests, as reported by Radio Free Asia. They report that the sources familiar with the Beijing crackdown say at least 40 people are missing and believed detained following a protest. A pre-recorded video by detained protester Cao Zhijin details more than a dozen detainees, while US-based rights activists said at least 40 have been quietly detained for their part in the protests, likely not just in Beijing. And this is what happens when you have a surveillance state. The government no longer needs tanks to intimidate and kill people. They can now simply track down and detain or even disappear people who dare disagree with the mighty CCP. In some ways, this is worse than the Tiananmen Square massacre because back then, they could see the threat coming. Still at present, when all is said and done, the media has lost interest in the story. That is when you strike and strike hard to ensure no such protest can ever happen again. The beauty is, all the actions are taken in silence, and all the information is censored to ensure that it will draw no scrutiny from other countries and people. One such individual who got tangled up in this mess is Xiao Xixin, an editor at the Peking University Publishing House. She accounts that the police started rounding up the protesters on December 18th using a criminal detention notice, but the intriguing thing to be noticed was a blank space was left where the suspected crime was supposed to be, and the detainees were asked to sign this form with no information of what crime they were charged for or even the knowledge of where they will be taken to. Xiao cited 13 people she knew had been taken away, with dozens of other young people reported missing. Chao, fearing for her freedom and having an equal passion for getting the truth out, pre-recorded a video that bears testament to her desire to call for rights and freedoms. She asked a friend to upload this testament if she was ever to be taken away by the police. In this video, Cao said, "We pay attention to what goes on in our society. If you all are watching this video, I have been taken away by the police, just like my other friends. We were full of sympathy for those who lost their lives, and with heavy hearts, we joined the crowd mourning at Langmei that night," she added. "Why are they enacting this revenge on us?" Cao said. "Why are the lives of ordinary young people being used to pay the price? We don't want to vanish into thin air," she said. "What are we expected to be convicted of, and on what evidence? Why is there no room for us to express our emotions in this society?" Cao went on to list the names, occupations, and times of disappearance of 13 missing young people and displayed a photo of her holding up a blank sheet of paper at the protest. They had been detained by the Chinese Communist Party on trumped-up charges with only half of them publicly named, so many people live in fear of getting caught. And the people who are detained, their family members, don't know what to do. As 2022 ended, the officials elected after Taiwan's 9-1 local elections on November 26 took office. These elections attracted a great deal of attention around the world. This time, the Kuomintang, KMT, the opposition party at the national level, gathered more than 50% of votes, and more than 61% of votes in mayoral elections. Many have analyzed the results intending to place bets on who is likely to run in the upcoming 2024 presidential election, but there's a massive issue with KMT, which is that it is still regarded mainly as pro-China party, despite gathering around 38% votes in the 2020 national elections. KMT is also aware of this issue and still chooses to not take any actions about this stigma. This dynamic has confused observers of East Asian politics and requires an explanation for a better understanding of cross-strait relations. It is not unusual for political parties to have different opinions in a democratic country, but the KMT differs from the group led by chairperson Eric Xu because KMT insists on sticking with the 1992 consensus. According to them, it is the key to communicating with Beijing, but agreeing to the 1992 consensus means that both sides of the Taiwan Strait belong to China. This stance on the cross-strait relationship is not acceptable to the bulk of voters in the KMT and Tsai's Democratic Progressive Party, DPP. KMT and other pan-blue voters believe that Xu's China policy is too similar to the DPP's, while pro-green supporters regard Xu and others as giving up Taiwan's sovereignty. Thus, these leaders have received little support in almost every poll. This is the primary reason for the KMT losing the national elections, but coming on top in the local elections, as local elections have nothing to do with international politics and pertain primarily to provincial-level governance. But this is far from reality before you think that KMT winning the election means China getting a hold of Taiwan. At first, KMT will first have to win the national election to have any effect on an international level. That brings us to China invading Taiwan in the future, but we also believe that Xi won't be attacking Taiwan anytime soon. First, a war between even a small country and an enormous power today is expensive, and not an easy walkover for the bigger side. Although this is not a guarantee as we saw with President Putin. Second, China's export markers drying up in Europe and the United States. Third, even though Xi has locked down a third 5-year term, his goal to consolidate a power base within the party still needs to be accomplished. And finally, TSMC is an asset the CCP can avoid losing, as they desperately need semiconductor technology to activate their ambitions. Although, these are all speculation, and there's no guarantee dictator Xi won't go total megalomaniac and lose all touch with reality. The chances of this happening are slim, but not non-existent. And this brings today's episode to its conclusion. If you stuck around to the end, thank you, much appreciated. We hope you liked the video. If you did, please like and share this video and press the subscribe button to stay up to date on the happenings in China. Thank you for spending time with us, and until next time, goodbye.